what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, July 7th, 2017, end of the week. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and it turns out the Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3. So we can all look forward to that here. All righty. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. So let's start in on the news. Obviously, at the G20, a lot of stuff going on, and it's really violent over there in the streets. There's 100,000 protesters literally flying in from around the world, descending on Hamburg to protest, and the place is looking like a war zone. Antifa is burning cars and destroying shops. Apparently a Porsche dealership got torched the other day. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because the American corporate media is describing these protests as anti-capitalists, and yet Antifa, by its very name, they're anti-fascist. So why are they in there protesting, or is possibly the American corporate media mischaracterizing what's going on over there in Hamburg? I would probably go for the latter one. Here's where it gets really interesting. It's so violent that a lot of the families of the world leaders are not able to leave their hotel out of a concern of violence, and they're basically trapped inside the hotel. Apparently the protesters are throwing Molotov cocktails, and apparently Bill de Blasio flew over to Hamburg, Germany, specifically to protest Donald Trump. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio has gone to Hamburg, Germany, and his decision to just skip on off comes one day after a police officer was murdered in the Bronx, and it also means that he has missed the swearing-in ceremony for 524 new New York Police Department recruits in order to catch his flight. So he's over there shouting invective at Donald Trump, and Donald Trump and Putin finally got their little meeting going today. It was supposed to originally be a half hour. It wound up stretching to 2 hours, and they talked about a lot of stuff. Everyone was taking a video of that first handshake, and it's hard to read from a photograph, but it looks to me like they had a very warm relationship, mutual respect. And they did talk about a lot of things: cybersecurity, Syria, North Korea, all these various other issues. And the sense that people are getting is it actually went very, very well. Now, interestingly enough, after the meeting, the U.S. and Russia announced they've reached a ceasefire agreement on Syria. Now, this is in the southwest of Syria and involves Jordan and Israel, which share the border. So I think the ceasefire is mostly about Jordan and Israel, not just flinging bombs and missiles into Syria anymore, because technically the U.S. and Russia are not actually fighting each other. Therefore, the ceasefire has no meaning in terms of them. We don't really have the fine details yet. A lot of this is still being leaked out early, but apparently they're pulling back. They're going to pull on back and seek more cooperation and less adversarial stance, and that's obviously a very, very good thing to try and pull back from the brink over there in Syria. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., the usual troublemakers are out there demanding Donald Trump not return these seized Russian diplomatic compounds. And they were seized under, again, an unproven allegation that Russia was engaging in espionage, and these were their spy centers or whatever it was. And Senators Jeanne Shaheen, Marco Rubio, and Johnny Laxon sent a letter to Trump saying, don't return them, don't return them. At this point, I think Trump ought to, because first of all, it is a tremendous breach of diplomatic protocol to seize diplomatic property, because technically that's the sovereign property of the foreign nation. And so there has to be a really good reason, like you've gone to war or something. Now, a lot of people are still talking about Donald Trump's speech in Poland, and he said a lot of things that a lot of people are really responding to, such as that Europe has a right to preserve its cultural identity. And I imagine George Soros is ricocheting off the walls over that one. and basically reversed the globalist vision of former President Obama. So that is basically wrapping up his legacy, and I'm sure we can count on Barack Obama to make some snide comments about the current president in the coming days. All right, let's take some phone calls. Mike up in Alaska, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, Trump gave a phenomenal speech in Poland. I'm just watching it over on Bill Still's channel. He posted some excerpts, and to me, this sounds like an alt-right speech with a tinge of civic nationalism in it. He's moving. He's not. I would say during the campaign he was a civic nationalist, and now he's getting more to the "we have a right to exist" type speech. It was amazing. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I unfortunately did not manage to catch all that much of it. But in reading the reviews, it looks like Donald Trump is making a good impression on the G20, with one or two exceptions like Angela Merkel. And apparently everyone, again, they don't know what was actually said, but the general sense is that a lot of good work was done in the meeting with Putin.
Mike, I used to live in Ukraine, and I've been to Poland as well, and they will fight. Those two, and Hungary as well. Those Eastern European nations are not going to back down from this whole clash of civilizations. So it's a good thing that he's there. We need him to be there. And if I would prefer a country like England to stick around, join us. But we can't. If they don't want to save themselves, we can't make them save themselves. And he's in the right place because he's with people that want to work together and maintain civilization. So he's making a good selection of where he wants to go. Mike, I wanted to touch on the HARP thing you brought up on yesterday's show.
Yes.
Yeah, the Air Force transferred that to the University of Alaska, so that's still partially operational.
Yes.
And I was in the campus buildings the other day putting up flyers, and they repainted the cafeteria, and they had an interesting photo of it. It's in Gakona, this station, this array.
Yes.
And on the wall, you should have seen. I'll go back and take a photo for you, but it said, "Conspiracy theorists say they're warming the ionosphere with this," and it's like, yeah, that's what they're doing. So, or that's what they can do with it. So, it's just funny how the conspiracy theorists and all that stuff is finding its way onto pieces of literature at universities and things like that.
Well, you need to understand, before we go any further, you need to understand a lot of that conspiracy theory is actually put out by the government itself to conceal the reality of what's going on. And I think probably the best example of that is that the U.S. government actually kicked up a lot of this flying saucer, Roswell, UFO stuff during the development of top-secret Black Project aircraft, so that when somebody would see several $1 billion of tax money fly overhead, they'd run to the nearest town and say, "I saw a flying saucer," and everybody would laugh at them and ignore them, and not pay attention to that little isolated hangar at the end of that runway out in the desert. And it's very interesting because if you look at the history of Hollywood films and TV shows about alien invasions and the rest of it, and exactly when they were being done, they all overlap the period of testing for various Black Project aircraft, including the SR-71, the stealth fighter, the F-117, and some of these newer stealth drones, Half Blue, and so forth and so on. And so this stuff gets put on out there. And so in the case of HARP, looking at that antenna array, it's obviously a phased array in medium frequencies, so the beam is steerable. And that's what led me to conclude that it was probably an attempt at an over-the-horizon radar system bouncing off the ionosphere. So the government puts out conspiracy theories about they're heating the ionosphere, they're using it to change the weather, blah, 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 so that people get caught up in discussing whether that's what it's really all about, and they don't really look at the facility with an objective eye to figure out what's really going on.
Right, and then once they got more satellite technology, some of this White Alice and Dew Line type technology was no longer.
It's all obsoleted. It's all obsoleted.
Yeah. Right. One other thing, Mike, I'm bouncing around here, but while I was up there, I saw a bunch of other posters, and I just thought this was worth noting because I never saw anything like it when I was at this same university. And that is, I don't know how to put it, Mike. There's all these posters talking about sexual assault and texting and trolling and people. It's basically everything on campus is creepy. You're creepy. I'm creepy.
I beg your pardon.
All the cops. I saw it and I thought, they're trying to turn everyone into like giant pandas, where they just don't talk to one another, and everyone is just a predator waiting to strike. And it's just a mental illness factory. I don't know how else to put it, Mike.
Well, I think part of it is this political correctness, selling the victimhood card, and turning us all into a nation of whiners and crybabies. And also, of course, it keeps the students from realizing that they're not really getting a quality education. They're not getting their money's worth. And most of them, I think something like, it's estimated 70% of college graduates will never in their lifetime pay back those student loans in our current economy.
Exactly. I got lucky with a scholarship, but I would be a Bernie bro if I was in that. I can sympathize with some of these the college student debt Bernie bros, because, like you said, they're never going to get out of it. And I got lucky, but it's a fork in the road. It could have went a different way. So you got to have some compassion for $1 trillion in outstanding student debt in this country. That is a problem. And the degrees, I'm not using what I got, although I enjoyed it. It's a piece of paper. So it's a tough situation, and then going around and saying everyone is going to rape you in your dorm or whatever, that doesn't, it happens, but it's making people antisocial, and
it's overblown and it's being exaggerated. We saw this all the way back in the 1990s with the rape epidemic, and it was put on out there to basically scare women into supporting the militant feminist agenda. And looking back in hindsight, it turned out there wasn't really a rape epidemic. I mean, there was rape, but it was actually in decline at the time. But it's all about using fear to draw support to a particular political agenda, whether it's fear of being raped, fear of the whites, fear of the blacks, fear of the Hispanics, fear of the Muslims, and on and on and on. Fear is a very powerful motivator to unsophisticated population.
Right. Well, thanks, Mike. Have a great day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're going to go back to the phones to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. A couple of things. Today the job report came out, and also they were talking about the economy. This administration is just like the Obama administration, lying. And when are people going to realize that there's no jobs out there?
No, there are no jobs out there. I mean, even Fox News only a couple of days ago was admitting that almost 50%, almost half of able-bodied Americans willing and able to work have not been able to find jobs for months or years. And that is a worse jobless rate for the American population than during the Depression of the 1930s, which is why it's doubly ridiculous that they're flooding this country with illegal immigrants and refugees. There are not going to be any jobs for them either.
I would agree, but what is this administration going to do about it?
I don't know that this administration can do much about it. I mean, Donald Trump's got a lot of good ideas, but one of the things that he doesn't have are the resources to effect a change. The government is hopelessly mired in debt. There's no revenue coming on in that isn't already earmarked for the wars in Israel and so forth. He doesn't really have a lot of options on what he can do other than to try and keep the population from losing its temper, which is why they're having to go on trying to maintain the illusion that the jobless rate is, way down there. They can't basically stand up and say, yeah, we've been lying to you all this time. There's a lot of very angry Americans out there, and it's not going to take much to push them over the edge.
So do you think Trump is going to be like Hoover then?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Democrats are already lining up to blame Trump for what appears to be an imminent economic crash.
Right. The other point, I was reading, I think it was James Defense Magazine, and they were saying that North Korea has 63 submarines. Do you think these submarines could be more dangerous than, say, certain missiles, considering most of our goods come from Asia, and they could sink those ships anytime that they want to?
Well, the North Korean submarines, as I understand it, they're diesel-electric. They're not very quiet, meaning that they're easy to find. There is a concern that some of North Korea's newer submarines are able to actually fire missiles. They don't have the number of missile launch tubes that, like the Ohio class, have, or that new Russian one, the follow-on to the Typhoon, I forget what it's called. In fact, it seems like they're limited to just 2 or 3 that are actually built into the conning tower, the sail, which is an idea that they got from one of the very earliest Russian ballistic missile submarines that only carried 2 missiles. But yeah, they could be a real problem. They could interdict the sea lanes of communication, but being diesel-electric, there are 2 drawbacks. There has to be a tender in attendance on the surface, which are easy to see and identify. And second, they do have to come to the surface every once in a while to recharge their batteries, so they're not as stealthy as the nuclear boats. It would be a considerable force to have to deal with, and it would be a problem. I think the best solution is we just don't go to war with them. Don't give them a reason to send those submarines out there.
Right, okay. Well, Michael, thank you very much. You have a nice weekend.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, interestingly enough, apparently one of the issues that Donald Trump is being talked to about at the G20 on an informal, social, oh, by the way, on the sideline, is this bizarre story of the DNC servers. And again, everyone at the G20 is asking the same thing we are. The most critical evidence proving Russian hacking is being withheld from federal investigators. The entire case that Russia hacked the DNC servers came from this one company, CrowdStrike, which has now backed off the claim. And still, that is the story from the DNC. And apparently, people at the G20 are saying that this really doesn't make any sense. And so Donald Trump was tweeting that on out, at which point John Podesta attacked Trump on Twitter, over this idea. It's time to let it go. What's wrong with you that you're still obsessing about the gosh darn server here? And Morning Joe literally came on out implying Donald Trump is crazy for even asking this question. And so the Morning Joe was out there. So they're talking about this is a reason to question the president's mental health, 25th Amendment, blah, blah, blah. So basically, according to MSNBC, anyone who questions the Russian hacking story must be crazy. And it's looking like CNN is going to have a lot of company on the way down. And CNN is on the way down. Their ratings have dropped so low, they're losing out to reruns of Yogi Bear, Full House, and Friends on Nick at Night. In that primetime slot, they're just evaporating right now. They've sunk to number 13 in the cable ratings. Rob Schneider is out there saying CNN is biased. Fake, lies, distortions, fake news, and blackmailers. It's time to call them the Corleone News Network. Don't say bad things about us, or we're going to do bad things to you here. All right, we're coming up here on a commercial break. We got a caller waiting on the line. I'm going to get to you as soon as we come on back. More about CNN and just this disconnect from reality we're seeing across all the corporate media right now. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to this show here. We're going to go back to the telephones. Bob in the Upper Peninsula, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Michael.
Good afternoon.
We've been 10 to 15 degrees below average since March.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it's 63, and the wind is blowing, and it feels like it is March. but we don't get any time on TV about the global warming on that, do we?
No, we don't. I mean, and again, the corporate media is there to sell you an idea, and they've been trying since the 1990s to sell the idea that the Earth is getting dangerously warm, it's leading to disaster, and it's all your fault, and you icky-poo human beings will atone for your sins by paying a carbon tax and buying carbon credits. And it's amazing they're still flogging this, but I think it's more a case of trying to maintain what's left of their reputation than any possibility that this is really going to succeed in convincing everybody. Because all the major corporate media, all the so-called science channels, they all threw their reputation on this idea that snow was a thing of the past, and it's a huge embarrassment for them right now. And they're still out there trying to sell that. But we've had this recent study that went back on in and showed that all of the warming that is in the officially released data coming from all these government agencies is the result of adjustments to the raw data. The warming isn't in the raw data. It's all being added on in, and the excuse by the government agencies is they have to correct biases in the raw data, but they don't say what that bias is or where it's coming from. They're just cooking the books like they do with the unemployment numbers, because that's basically what they do. It's all they know how to do. They have gotten by with lies, fraud, and deception so long, they don't know any other way to work. The same thing with the corporate media like CNN. They're still continuing to make the same mistakes that they've been making all this time. They have forgotten how to be real journalists and reporters over there.
Yeah, and the other item is, during that Comey thing where they had him on TV, he admitted that they were not availed of the actual evidence from the Hillary Clinton servers and all that. They just took the Democrats' own hired people's word for it and put it out as evidence.
That was exactly it. You know, the resorting to authority. You can't possibly think we would lie to you. We're the government, of course. Well, that really doesn't wash anymore.
Thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to let you go here and get back to the news. All right, so we're talking about the Corleone News Network. If you do something they don't like, they're going to threaten you and blackmail you. And the CNN president is basically on the warpath against Donald Trump. They see themselves literally in a conflict with Donald Trump over who's got credibility and who doesn't. And so the CNN president is saying he's comfortable going to battle with the commander-in-chief every day. So CNN came on out with this ad attacking Donald Trump that featured two quotes, one by Abraham Lincoln and one by Benjamin Franklin. And again, not learning from their past mistakes, the quote from Lincoln was misquoted rather badly, and the quote supposedly from Ben Franklin was a complete misattribution. So even now, they're not bothering to check their facts or verify anything. It's just whatever pops into their head, it's going to go on out there. And if that wasn't bad enough, as you know, the movie studios are having a really terrible summer with the R-rated comedies, that genre. It's critics hate the movies. Audiences felt a similar way. Chips, Baywatch, Snatched, Rough Night, The House. And Variety has come on out saying that the reason these films are doing bad is not because it's rehashed scripts and pandering to the audience here. It's that ever since Trump was elected, the dynamics of the audience have changed, and what they think makes a good comedy is now different. So it's Donald Trump's fault that all of these films have failed at the box office. It could never be the fault of the studio executives or the filmmakers themselves. Oh, heavens, no, that just cannot be. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. Got another caller waiting on the line. We will be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, Mike, I hope they never remake the original Wizard of Oz because they'll turn the midgets all transgender or something, the way their agenda is, you know.
Well, those little people were pretty messed up back when they made that original. In fact, there was even a film made about it called Under the Rainbow. And
wasn't that with Chevy Chase, right?
Yeah, it may have been. I didn't actually see it. I just heard about it. But they were talking about just how difficult it was making the scenes of with the little people in there. They had a lot of just children in the background, but the foreground people were all these circus performers, and apparently they were a very, very wild bunch of people.
There was an old show. It was back on Channel 4. I think it was called The Wizard. It had about a midget who helped the CIA or something. It was actually kind of a neato show, but it only lasted like a couple episodes. Hey, Mike, on this whole Syria, with this whole ceasefire, I hope nobody's buying this again. I really don't.
Well, again, we don't know what the details are, except that it is confined to the southwestern part of Syria, where the U.S. is, in theory, not allowed to go anyway because of the Russian no-fly zone. But I think everybody realized that it was getting a little too close to outright war. And, of course, the war hawks in our government, they're out there screaming there shouldn't be a ceasefire, go in, go after Assad. And we know that Israel can always kick off a new attack onto the Golan by claiming an errant projectile has hit some more dirt somewhere near where they're standing. But
Mike,
I was going to say, it signals that Trump and Putin themselves want to back this off before it really does become a major conflict.
Yeah, because you know that pre-release of Assad's planning on, like they know. Like, does anybody actually believe? Like, they know he's planning on starting another gas. I don't actually really believe that crap. Like at this point, I mean, you got to be a real moron to really believe any of this crap anymore. I mean, how are you going to know? A month ahead of time.
Well, the fact that it never happened, I think, tells us that they realize that they've gone to that well way too many times, and the public just isn't going to drink that particular Kool-Aid anymore.
Hey, Mike, I was flipping through the news on, I think it was at 3 or something with Shepard Smith,
yep.
And Fox News is crap too because he says he even says when they go to shake hands. Well, in Russia they'll be using that Trump sticking out his hand like Putin's the boss in that shot. The Russians will be using that as propaganda. So Fox News is a propaganda pusher of the deep state too. So I don't want anybody to not knowing that, because they got their own agenda too.
Well, they all do. There is nobody in the corporate media that is actually trying to report honestly on what's going on in the world. They're all bought and paid for correspondents and prostitutes. And again, Mika Brzezinski over on MSNBC admitted on air last February that they see that their job is to control what the American people are thinking. And I would hope the American people are going to stand up and say, by golly, we're not going to let you control what we're thinking. We'll decide for ourselves what's going on.
But that shows everybody, when she said that, because I saw her say that people do anything for a buck. Your own countrymen will sell you out for a buck, and that's a fact. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. They get a lot of bucks for being very good, creative liars here. Now, getting on back to the political news, interesting little article. This came out of the Gateway Pundit. About how Maria Bartiromo was correct. John Podesta lied about his ties to Russia. There should be an investigation into him. Why is all the media attention and all this congressional investigations all about Trump, and they don't find anything? And their excuse is, well, the fact that we haven't found anything proves we just have to look harder. And meanwhile, you have Podesta and his ties to Russia. You have Hillary Clinton and the Uranium One deal. And it's like, no big deal. No big deal. That sort of thing goes on all the time. We're not concerned about when Democrats have ties to Russia. It's only when Donald Trump has. Okay, well, I'm glad to hear about this ceasefire situation here, and one thing it may be impacting is apparently Russia did a second cruise missile attack into Syria, and they destroyed Islamic State facilities in Akrabat, and they released the aerial footage showing 3 separate targets being hit. And they're using their KH-101 stealth cruise missiles. They're an air-launched cruise missile. They can be standoff launched and very, very effective little weapons there. Meanwhile, and this could also be another aspect of the ceasefire, U.S. air raids killed 224 civilians in Syria's Raqqa in a single month. And so it's really kind of weird to see our corporate media and the government going on about Assad is killing his own people. Assad is killing his own people. Really? How many can you prove he's actually killed? And how many has the U.S. killed? Well, it's okay for us to kill the Syrian people. We're in a war on terror here. It's only wrong when Assad does it. It's amazing here. Israel piped up their little 2 shekels worth here. They want the United States to control the de-escalation zones in Syria instead of Russia. Now, Russia set up the de-escalation zones. The U.S. wasn't invited to participate. And Israel's out there saying, well, Russia should just get out and let the U.S. control the de-escalation zones, ignoring that little tiny detail that Russia is in Syria at the request of the Syrian government, while the U.S. presence in Syria is illegal under international law. But then, when did Israel ever care about international law? And on that same topic, another article coming out of Sana, head of the Russian delegation to the Astana 5 meeting, Alexander Lavrentiev, announced just yesterday that the results of the Astana meeting were not a big step forward, but they were in the right directions towards stabilizing and trying to find a peaceful solution to the crisis in Syria. But he continues to maintain the U.S. military presence in Syrian territory is illegal. Syria did not invite the United States to come on in and start bombing stuff. Syria did not grant permission for the U.S. to be there. It is illegal under international law. It is, for all intents and purposes, a military invasion, an act of war. Regardless of whatever pretext or pretense or excuse is given, the U.S. has militarily intervened in Syria. That is an act of war. Now, moving back on down to Qatar, Saudi and the allies are threatening more measures against Qatar, along economic punitive measures, legal measures, political measures, which tells us that they're backing off the idea of a direct military intervention, and that is also a good thing, because a direct military intervention into Qatar could explode into a regional war, and nobody really wants that. Now, Russia recently tested a new ICBM, the Bulava, and they launched it from their nuclear-powered submarine, the Yuri Dolgoruki. I probably blew that, and I apologize to the Russians listening to this show. And they test-launched this intercontinental ballistic missile from a submerged position in the Barents Sea, and the missile's mock warheads, it's a MIRV, successfully hit all their designated targets thousands of miles away. And you'll notice the United States isn't making a big stink about Russia's testing an ICBM, because only an idiot would be provoking Russia at this point. The U.S. only goes after little tiny countries unable to defend themselves. And, of course, what North Korea is doing is rushing to be able to develop that deterrent ability. And they're getting very, very close. It's becoming very obvious, even at the stage it's at right now. An invasion of North Korea will be very costly in terms of military hardware, personnel. It'll be another Vietnam if they go in there. And as a matter of fact, Secretary of State Tillerson came out today and extended an invitation to North Korea to come back to the negotiating table. This is only 24 hours after Nikki Haley was out there trying to say, North Korea doesn't want to talk to us, which was only a couple of weeks after Nikki Haley said, we refuse to talk to North Korea. And we did have that article earlier in the week where somebody speculated that Kim Jong-un's tough talk was really an attempt to bluff the U.S. back to the negotiating table. And all Kim Jong-un wants is for the U.S. to stop sailing along their coastlines and flying planes along their border and acting in a belligerent manner, which sounds like a really, really good thing to do. Now, over in Israel, UNESCO went ahead and declared Hebron's Old City a World Heritage Site. And Israel had lobbied against this intensely, because obviously Israel has designs on going into Hebron eventually and taking it on over and rebuilding on it and erasing the cultural heritage of the area. And UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site because basically it contains a lot of important locations and artifacts that are important to Christians and Muslims, as well as by Jews, including the Tomb of the Patriarchs, the Ibrahim Mosque, and various. It's basically the second holiest site in Judaism and the fourth in Islam, and it is now protected from control and encroachment by Israel. Now, getting back over to North Korea, China and South Korea continue to urge diplomacy. They're responding to all this U.S. talk about military action. And Nikki Haley, she's up there at the Security Council just saying the most provocative things. We're going to act on our own if we have to. We're going to use all of our various options. And China and South Korea are saying, let's cool it down here. And in another condemnation of our corporate media, Russia is denying the story that it blocked the United Nations Security Council statement on the North Korea missile test, and they're condemning the misrepresentation of what happened in the corporate media. Now, Donald Trump is once again asking China to put pressure on North Korea, and we're looking at this seriously deranged, almost schizophrenic policy toward China, because at the same time the U.S. government is asking China to help them with North Korea, they continue to provoke China. And apparently China is very upset over the coming war games involving the U.S., India, and Japan. It's the 16th annual Malabar Naval Exercises. It begins next Monday, and they're basically exercising in the area of Chinese activity in the Indian Ocean. And once again, the U.S. has overflown those South China Sea islands with supersonic bombers, and China's not happy about that either. So it almost seems like there are two China policies at work, one where we need them to deal with North Korea, not to mention economically, and there's the other that continues to provoke them. And this is a symptom to me of a badly factionalized U.S. government. And Donald Trump is not fully in control of it, and he needs to work on that. So, down in Venezuela, it looks like their government has lost control and is about to collapse. And this appears to be the end of a very, very long U.S. intervention. They've been after Venezuela going back to the time of Hugo Chavez. And so it looks like there's going to be a transition down there, a coup d'etat, a new junta going on in, and it guarantees that Venezuelan oil will now be traded only for the U.S. dollar from now on. Getting on into the economic news, somebody has done a study about the growing use of automation and robots, and they're now saying 38% of American jobs are at risk of being replaced by automation. Now, I am a big fan of technology. I've spent my entire life in high-tech one way or the other, NASA, or the computer animation and the film industry and everything. But this is a mistake, because your customers, or your employees collectively, are also your customers collectively. If you're letting half of your employees go to replace them with robots, you're going to have only half the number of customers coming on into the store. And by the way, those robots, despite the comment by Bill Gates, those robots aren't paying taxes. So you're looking at a major revenue loss to the government as well. This has not been thought all the way through. It's like when they first started this idea of offshoring jobs, and they weren't really thinking it all the way through. And the first few companies that offshored their jobs, they saw their profits go up, and everybody else said, oh, well, we're going to do that too. And the jobs were just fleeing this country. And George W. Bush actually helped them by changing the tax code that actually made it advantageous to these multinational corporations to have their employees overseas. Carried through to its ultimate end, we're looking at a country where the factories and the shopping malls are filled with robots standing around with nothing to do because there are no more customers. Robots do not go on out to the shopping mall and buy things. They don't get Nikes. They don't get baseball jackets. They don't get their hair done. There are certain jobs robots are ideal for, like cleaning out burned out nuclear reactors. But we have to bring the jobs back to the American people, not accelerate this mass unemployment. And again, it troubles me sometimes to see how short-sighted our politicians are. They're just caught up in this model. I only have to deal with this stuff and just shove it off and kick it down the road until the end of my term. And then I can retire and it's somebody else's problem. And that kind of thinking is what got us into our current mess, accumulated over the last 100 years since the creation of the Federal Reserve, where everybody knew there would ultimately be a serious threat to the country. But it's the next administration's problem to deal with. That's really very poor quality thinking, in my opinion. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And it just seems that CNN cannot stop lying. Apparently, Jim Acosta just tweeted on out a tweet where he said, big contrast, Lavrov talked to reporters on camera after the Trump-Putin meeting. Tillerson did not. And, of course, he was immediately challenged because Secretary Tillerson held a recorded Q&A session with reporters. So it's, if at first you don't succeed, lie again. I think CNN is in serious, serious trouble. I have to be very honest, and I feel bad for all the regular rank and file employees at CNN who are about to lose their jobs. But I think it would be a very good thing if one of these major media players were to collapse, because it's going to send a message that they're not invulnerable, that they will be held to account for the quality of their reporting by the American people, and that the independent media has really arrived. Getting on back to the economic news, Stockman is out there saying we're on the fast track to Carmageddon. And he's talking about back in the 1950s when General Motors had 50% of the auto market. And the conventional wisdom was, as General Motors goes, so goes the nation. Well, it isn't that way anymore. There are a lot of warning signs out there. When is it going to hit? We don't know. Because the bankers and the government are constantly changing the rules to try and stretch things out as long as they can. But the situation is clearly deteriorating. We are now seeing cash exiting the bond market. We've got that pension problem. We've got the unpaid student loans. They're in a huge bubble. It's going to unwind at some point in the future. And as I told that caller, the Democrats are already getting ready to lay the blame at Donald Trump. Oh, the economy was just fine when Obama left office, and Donald Trump did all of this. And again, it's a replay of what happened to Herbert Hoover. They just blamed him. But Hoover did not create the Depression of the 1930s. It was created for him. Same situation all over again. Illinois is rapidly becoming the poster child for the coming sovereign debt crisis. The Illinois House voted to pass a 32% income tax hike. The governor vetoed it, but he was then overridden. So if you're in Illinois, your state income taxes just went up 32%. And even that's not going to be enough to deal with it. Now, interestingly enough, over at Mike Adams, he's saying a big reason Illinois has been driven to the edge of bankruptcy isn't pensions, isn't unfunded liabilities, it's their state Medicaid program, which has been the victim of these sky-high prices by the pharmaceutical industry, just bleeding them dry. Okay, we got to do a station identification. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Tony in Puerto Rico. Aloha, Tony. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Aloha, Mike. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Listen, I'm a little intrigued about the Revolutionary War. Why didn't France, Spain, and Mexico fought with British against the Americans? Because they also had property in America, didn't they?
No, at the time, the colonies were almost exclusively British. And as a matter of fact, France, throughout that period of time in history, was more or less constantly at war with Great Britain. And France came into the revolution on the side of the revolutionaries more about annoying Britain than actually having that much care about the colonists, although obviously some of the people on the French side were very committed to the idea of freedom, like General Lafayette. And, of course, the American Revolution was a very strong and powerful inspiration for the French Revolution that followed on just a few years later.
Yeah, I understand that, Mike, but didn't France have Louisiana?
At that time, Louisiana wasn't part of the British colonies.
Okay. Now, what about Mexico? Didn't Mexico have Texas, California?
Texas and California didn't exist back then.
Okay,
and again, those territories were outside the British colonies, which were the item under contest. So they didn't really have a truck in that fight, so to speak.
Right. What about the Spaniards? Didn't they have Florida?
Yeah, but again, Florida wasn't part of the colonies. I think you need to go on back and look at the map of the original 13 colonies, and you'll understand. They weren't fighting over the nation as we know it today. They were fighting over a much, much smaller piece of territory.
I got you. Okay. All right, thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Getting on back to the economic news, Microsoft is announcing major, major layoffs. And they still have not, they've started notifying employees whose jobs are being cut, and more than likely it's people in quality control and places like that. And one source is saying that it's going to be several thousand employees. CNBC said the number is only 3,000, but he didn't have a source for that number. But obviously Microsoft is now in huge trouble. And I think the reason is the arrogance they had in trying to force Windows 10 on people. And we just dug our heels in and said, no, we are sick of this planned obsolescence nonsense where every 5 years we're forced to buy all new product. And especially in this case, the replacement, the new version is worse than what we had before. And in a healthy economy, maybe we can go along with that kind of nonsense, but we don't have that kind of an economy anymore. And that business model where your long-term financial planning requires the consumer to buy the same thing over and over and over and over again is not viable in the current economic realities. And any large corporation who has not adjusted to that new reality, they're going to be in trouble. And I think that is a big part of what's happening to Microsoft. Apparently over in the Bank of Japan, they've gone on a bond buying epidemic, if you will. They're trying to buy unlimited 10-year Japan government bonds at 0.11%. So apparently they're trying to stock up, and again, here in this country, money is actually leaving the bond market. Now, over in Russia and Ukraine, the Ukrainian farmers are now directly appealing to Russia to try and find a way around Kiev's trade blockade with Crimea. Because when Crimea went over to the Russian Federation and Kiev declared an economic blockade, it basically cut these farmers off from a major part of their market. They don't have a place to sell their produce any longer. And that's really what's wrong with all this nonsense about sanctions and blockades and embargoes. It's an easy thing for these rulers to get on up and, wag their genitalia at each other and thump their chest and say, I'm going to hurt you. But it's the ordinary people who suffer from these things. Whether it's the Crimean blockade, the sanctions against Russia, the oil price wars, it's always going to come on down to ordinary people who wind up paying the real stiff price for it all. It doesn't hurt the rulers all that much. It's just numbers and a ledger to them. And it really has gone on way too far. I mean, all of this global geopolitics, this push to a new world order, this U.S. against Russia and China, it's already inflicting major damage all across the globe. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. As I mentioned earlier to that caller on the line, 70% of college grads will never pay off their student loans. And college has become just another scam here in the United States of America. You get lured in with promises of high-paying jobs. Oh, you'll pay off those student loans in just a few years. And they're not there. Today, college is training kids for an economy that no longer exists. And college has just become another way to just get those kids and plunge them on that barbed debt hook as hard as possible, as early as possible. I mean, the banks are so desperate to get new borrowers to keep the Ponzi scheme going. They're now literally going after high school kids. They want to give high school kids credit cards now. So, all right, we have a caller on the line. Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I hope you're well.
I'm well.
That's great. Hopefully the lady... Oh, wait a minute. Oh, the Lady Claire's going to be coming out soon, right?
Yeah, she'll be here in about 53 minutes.
Okay, anyway, earlier you were talking about Japan with their bond market. It's a joke. They're 300%, debt to GDP. It's absolutely insane. But one of the things you said was they're looking at a 10-year bond that'll pay 0.11%. Now, you said 0.11, and there is a difference. I'm not, saying anything other than if you take $1,000 and you add 0.11 percentage points to that, it's not much. It's like $1.10. Whereas when people refer to 0.11 as 0.11, it sounds bigger, but it's not. It's almost nothing, right?
It's almost nothing. It really is. What the Bank of Japan is doing with the government of Japan is what our Federal Reserve is doing with Washington, D.C. They're just creating money out of thin air and finding a reason to give it to the government to keep them propped up.
Yeah, and here's the only thing. Here's what I don't like about it, because the government's doing it, right? If money, if currency were free to people like you and I, we could actually make a difference in the economy, because we would be spending it, right? I don't have a problem with like quote unquote free money, but you know as well as I do that government, large S, is out of control, and it doesn't matter what country you look at. It's ridiculous. So, this is not going to end well. It's coming. Just like one of my favorite guys that calls into your show from New Jersey. This is not going to end well, and people need to understand this, as quickly as possible. Get out of debt and start buying, canned goods like canned tomatoes and pasta and the staples that you can, hoard, quote unquote. because we're going to need it. Times are going to get tough here. I mean, we can see this happening. I can see it coming. I bet you can too. What's going to happen the next time the economy down? What are they going to do? Like, take the debt that's existing now, and then we're going to print 10 times that, and it's over. It's over.
Yeah, we're going to be down in Zimbabwe territory with paper notes that say $100 trillion on them. Printing away the debt never works in the long run. And the reason we're in such trouble is, again, we have a government made up of politicians and officials who aren't thinking long term. It's how can I make this hang together until I am out of office? I'm retired, or somebody else is going to take the blame for the fall. That's the way they think. That's the way politicians think. And it's not very productive. It's not very effective. But it is a common feature of all failing empires. Okay, I guess we lost Al. We were hearing problems on the line here. So let's take a phone call from Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I have sort of a philosophical question for you surrounding North Korea. We know that there's 24 million people living there in just abject horror.
Well, we've been told there are 24 million people living there in abject horror by the same people who told by the same people who told us Saddam had nuclear weapons.
Okay, I would, from the stuff with like Otto Warmbier and from, people that have traveled. There's a great book called Dear Reader out there that documents, the independent reporter who went there and documented a whole bunch of stuff.
Well, let me put it to you this way, okay? If somebody wanted to propagandize that people in the United States were suffering, they could send a reporter down to the Appalachian area. And look at all the people living out of shacks down there and do up a book or a news article and make it look like the entire country is that way. Now, for those of you who have Google Earth, it might be a very good exercise for you to actually go on in and look at North Korea. And yes, there are areas of squalor and poverty, but there does seem to also be a very solid middle class that are living in decent houses.
I guess then that kind of answers my question. I guess that kind of settles it for me.
Okay.
Because I was saying, based on what I've seen from North Korea, I think that there is a legitimate humanitarian
When were you there?
effort that needs to be happening there. When was I there? And that's why I said, based on what I've seen of North Korea.
Okay.
And what I've been, from a multiple of sources, most of them not within the mainstream media.
Well, again, being the age that I am, I remember the days of the first Cold War, where everywhere, whether it was on TV, magazines, newspapers, even at school, we were being given an image of the Soviet Union, which ultimately turned out to be completely false. And it was simply a way to get us to hate the Soviet Union, to demonize the Soviet Union, to demonize the leadership of the Soviet Union. And I'm not saying they were perfect. They made a lot of really bad mistakes like Lysenkoism and so forth. But again, we have to be very cautious right now that the government propagandists, they know nobody is paying attention to corporate media any longer. They're trying to develop new pathways to feed the propaganda to you, including controlled outlets on the independent media.
Well, and so for the sake of argument, for the sake of this discussion, let's assume that everything, all the horrors, all the work camps, everything we've seen from North Korea is true, for the sake of this argument. Would you say under those conditions that there would be a moral, humanitarian sort of, we must do something to help these people?
Well, let me ask you a question. Okay, looking at the fact that we have prison labor factories in this country, do you think there's a humanitarian crisis here that needs to be dealt with?
Well, no, in the sense that, like in North Korea, if I'm a father and I get sent to the work camps and I die in the work camps and say I've been sent there for 40 years and I die there after 6, those 34 years still remaining fall down to my family, and they will then have to go to the work camps and work in my place.
And why are you why are you sure about that?
And once again, I said this is based on, for the sake of this conversation, based on what I've
okay,
heard.
well, it sounds to me like it sounds to me like we're having a debate on how many angels can dance on the head of a pin.
No. The point of my question is to say, if everything we've heard, if all of the horrors from North Korea are true, and I'm not going to say that they're all true, but if the living standards and if the things that the Kim Jong-un are doing over there are legit, at that point, would you think that there is a basic humanitarian
The question is the question is meaningless because I do not concede your prime assumption that we actually know what's going on in North Korea any more than we knew what was going on in Iraq prior to that war, any more than we know what was really going on in Iran back when they were demonizing Ahmadinejad and saying they were getting ready to strike at Israel. We don't really know, okay? The American people are the most lied to people on the face of the earth, and you have to remember that before you look at anything on the TV or newspapers or magazines. Anyway, Kyle, coming up on a commercial break, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much. But it is a meaningless question. You know, he wants to have a discussion on a pure hypothesis that for once in the last 3 decades, we're actually being told the truth about a nation that the U.S. government clearly has designs on. So I think that's rather naive. All right, getting on back to the economic news. Homelessness, say that 3 times fast. Rivero speaks, take 2. Homelessness in New York City spiked by nearly 40% so far this year. That's another indicator. Things are really going downhill. We have to get people jobs. We have to bring the jobs back somehow. And I'm not talking about we make a deal with a foreign car factory that's going to hire a few thousand people. We're talking about 90 million Americans need a job right now. And unfortunately, it's going to be impossible to wave a magic wand and just all of a sudden have all these shiny new factories and new technologies. We've been allowing our manufacturing to decline since the 1980s, and it will take a similar period of time to rebuild it. And again, nobody wants our GMO agriculture, and it's going to be a major mess unwinding from that one. And again, one of the reasons I totally back Donald Trump's resurgence of NASA and its retasking, getting them away from global warming and actually going back out and exploring the universe is not because we need to explore the universe, but because we need to remember that the tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, with all the attendant jobs, was born in the research and development that led to the Apollo missions to the moon. Unfortunately, much of that tech development still involved foreign manufacturers, and the United States has forgotten how to make a lot of this stuff. A lot of the people in this country who know how to do large-scale fabrication of integrated circuits and so forth, they've been lured away by other countries who respect manufacturing and those who can manufacture. We got a long, long way back to fix everything that's wrong with this country. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Kathleen in Paris, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Yes, it's back one topic ago about propaganda and the young man who was, carried away with the propaganda about North Korea. And a professor I had in the university one time said something really eye-opening. She said, I'm going to tell you something very surprising. She said, the sun actually shines in Russia.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Too. Because at that time, it was a long time ago, but at that time, the only images we had of Russia were people in gray coats waiting in bread lines.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there was that one time when the Soviet Union did make that disastrous experiment with Lysenkoism, and bread was in short supply, and it ultimately led to that deal where the U.S., which then was the breadbasket to the world, did sell a whole bunch of grain to Russia to get them through the tough time. Anyway, we got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Got another caller waiting on the line. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm getting all kinds of emails from people who have a more direct experience of North Korea. And one of them pointed me at a documentary from Russia Today called "The Happiest People on Earth: North Korea, the Rulers, the People, and the Official Narrative." It's about an hour long, and it will open your eyes as to what life is like in North Korea. And I'm seeing things like rock bands. And apparently they have state-funded daycare for all working parents. And, oh, there's a little tiny cute guy, and he's playing with a toy gun. Can you imagine the uproar from the liberals if that was happening here in this country? And, yeah, this is going to be worth watching. And I'm just skipping forward through it. Nice factories. Yeah, guess what? They remember that comment that Kennedy made in Germany? We all cherish our children's future. We all walk the same earth. We all breathe the same air. This is definitely it. So that's your homework for the weekend. There'll be a pop quiz on Monday. We're going to go back to the phones here. Hoss in Nebraska. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was listening to you talk about all these Americans that don't have jobs and stuff. And I've been listening to you for about a year now, and I don't understand why people don't just move to an area where there are jobs. I mean,
where would that be?
I mean, okay, well, in Columbus, Nebraska, there's over 100 jobs right now in manufacturing.
Ooh,
in
100.
Nebraska, there's 50.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's 100 people, but that's one city. So if you get 10, that's 1,000. So now we can just keep adding up cities. If you want to, just stop being a milk system, and being, I'm not going to have a pity party for you. I mean, I moved around a lot, because I was in the Army and stuff. So, I mean, I shouldn't have to. I mean, I don't feel sorry for anyone that says I can't find a job. I can throw a stone anywhere in this state and find you a job. So.
Well, good for you, and maybe you should open up an employment agency then. But the reality is, we have almost half of able-bodied Americans have not been able to find jobs over the weeks and months. That's the reality. I mean, there's a few jobs here and there, certainly around here in Hawaii. Every time there's an offer for a job, thousands of people show up to apply for it.
Well, why don't people move to places where there are jobs? I mean, you can just go on any website and say,
I know the Army has paid for your moves. I know the Army's paid for your moves during your whole career with them, but it's a very expensive thing for people to move, especially from here in Hawaii. I mean, Claire and I are trying to find a way back to the mainland, and we keep getting estimates from the moving companies between $15,000 and $20,000 it's going to take. Okay, it's not that easy.
Sometimes you got to bite the bullet to.
Why do we have to bite the bullet when the government and the bankers have made this mess? Okay, let's put the blame where let's put the blame where the blame belongs. They offshored our jobs. They mired us in unpayable debt, and their solution to every one of their self-made problems is to go on out and raise taxes and fees on the rest of us. And I'm glad you've got 100 jobs in the town where you're living, but that's certainly not the case for the vast majority of the country. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Rick in Arizona. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
All right, Mike, you got the best show on RBN. Hey, this reminds me of Libya. The people in Libya were just too happy. That's why they had to go over there and wreck it. And the same thing in North Korea. When you have a country that's really happy and it works and people are living a good life, you cannot have that sticking out, in people's faces like over here in America, because it gives the America way of life a bad name.
Well, what's really interesting about the propaganda for Libya, and for that matter, the Soviet Union, was not that they were necessarily suffering. It's just that they weren't living their lives the way we did. Therefore, by default, they were inferior.
Well, they were living a pretty good life considering they paid you to go to school and gas was 50 cents a gallon. But I knew people from South Korea, and they had relatives still across the DMZ.
Yep.
And they never said anything. They never made any comments about how tough it was up there and how the people of South Korea, the older generation, wouldn't mind reuniting with the North Koreans.
I think it would be a good thing. I think it would be a good thing. Anyway, Rick, got to let you go. We got to do a commercial break. I got another caller waiting. Heading to the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And Nikki Haley has already come on out with both barrels blazing about UNESCO declaring the Hebron Old City a World Heritage Site. She's out there saying it's an affront to history. Boy, I got to tell you, if Nikki Haley wants to work so hard for Israel, why isn't she their ambassador instead of ours? In fact, at this point, I'm ready to start a GoFundMe project to ship Nikki Haley over to Israel. She loves it so much. We would just get a big wooden crate, drop her in there with some MREs, drill some air holes, don't want an embarrassment over there, and just send her on over there. Because if you're not ready to put this country first, you should not be in any positions of authority. That's where we are. We have to. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Al in Canada, for some reason your call got cut off before, so welcome back. And what were we talking about? Al in Canada, are you there? Okay, it looks like we lost him again. So let's switch over to Alex in San Antonio. Alex, are you there?
Aloha, Mike, and I don't know what the Hawaiian word for congratulations is, or at least tentative congratulations is, but big congratulations out there for everybody who's an out-of-the-box thinker, because for at least right now, World War III seems like it's been diverted just for a little bit.
Well, we'll see. We are breathing a little bit easier, but of course, for peace to happen, everybody has to agree. It only takes one maniac with a bomb to keep the war going. And there are, unfortunately, so many people within so many governments who are still agitating for war because they're invested in the defense industries or they're seeking promotion. So
and that's absolutely fine, Mike. I hate to interrupt you. They can dream, they can do what they want, they can get into the airplanes, and we can give them the orange jumpsuits, and they can go fight themselves. But they need the populace of the United States of America. They need Americans to want to fight in order for this thing to be what it needs to be for their plans to go through, and that is not happening. At least today, there is a monolithic encouragement across all people who want peace, whether they're on the left or the right, and at least they see that the real leaders, that are ones that are in charge, they don't want to fight each other, and neither should neither do the populations. So let the crazies go fight whatever they want to fight, but at least I know that the battle is far from over, but at least it has taken a major turn where we can now say it's not a speculation anymore. Now we know no one wants to fight, so we're just going to go after those who are violently pursuing belligerents.
Yes. That would be a nice idea. Personally, I think we ought to take all these people who want a war and we drop them in a sports arena with chainsaws, and whoever comes out with most bodily parts, gets to go home. And meanwhile, we run a little gambling on the side. We sell the pay-per-view rights to cable TV. Yeah. We could actually pay off the national debt with that.
No, I'm with you 100%. I'm like, okay, let's start taking bets on, who's going to win this. Is Zucker going to beat Zuckerberg? The battle of the Zuckers. We can even, start little marketing things for it. Meme it out ourselves. It just, at this point, it's not that we feel like we've won. It's that we know that the tide has turned, and we know that the whole planet knows that America, and especially Donald Trump, those who were on the fence about him, like, does he really want to fight? Does he really want to do this? Now they know that he doesn't, and that is going to be a unifying factor that is along all of America. And I think every peace-loving person on the planet and everybody who's ever been through a war is going to want to believe this, with what we believe and what we've known and why we voted for him, this peaceful, cooperative side of Trump, and not this, buffoon that gets on Twitter and does things that, yes, they're entertaining. However, they do tend to take away from his optics. I guess it's bad optics, you could say. But this, I mean, and I'm sorry, I know I'm going long here, but I feel that you've been vindicated after so long. I wish I could give you a hug, man, and a big kiss, and thank you, and say thank you so much, because you are a big energy node in the independent media around the planet. And for a long time, you know, this has been on the other side, more like we're definitely having to prepare to fight than, you know,
okay, well, let me cut on in here, okay, because
go ahead.
Okay, I will agree we're seeing some positive indicators about Donald Trump, but offsetting that is the fact that Trump does not appear to be totally in control of the government, and Donald Trump would not be the first president who wanted peace, who was maneuvered into war by those around him, especially the Defense Department. So we know that
No, I agree with you.
We know that the establishment will very often do their best to prevent peace. We were talking the other day about how somebody actually sabotaged Francis Gary Powers' U-2 so that it would come down over Russia in order to derail the peace talks between Kennedy and Khrushchev. So these kind of things go on, and I think Donald Trump, when he comes on back from the G20, he's probably going to find a lot of very angry people in Washington, D.C. who are going to be screaming at him that he was showing weakness, that we need to move forward on Syria, and so forth and so on. Donald Trump really needs to get control of the government, and the first place he's going to have to start is get rid of these Obama holdovers who are still in the administration, and basically start taking a very heavy hand with his own White House staff. You're either supporting Donald Trump, the president, or you can go find another job somewhere else, because he's got way too many people working for him who see themselves as his manipulators, including McMaster's and Harry Reid, who openly advocate lying to the president in his daily briefing in order to maneuver him into doing what they want. And the president isn't there.
I understand, Mike.
Okay.
It's just that what I'm saying is the thing but it's looking like the tide is turning because of all the pedophile arrests that are happening. I don't know if you just saw what John Podesta did, but he just basically committed suicide on social media, but on Twitter specifically. But I mean, the tide is turning. The pedophiles are being arrested, and I believe that that's probably what this is setting up. The arrest of major political figures all over the globe for various crimes, but most will probably go unnamed just because they will be too shocking.
that tends to be the case. Well, apparently they just bagged several high-ranking German and European politicians in a sweep over in Germany as well. Anyway, listen.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. You be well. Have a great weekend, okay?
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news here, the economic news. Apparently, Americans who can no longer afford their homes are now up 146% over the past 16 years, which lines up very nicely with the war agenda. And under federal guidelines, households that spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs are considered cost-burdened and will have difficulty affording basic necessities like food, clothing, transportation, and medical care. This at the same time, we're seeing places like St. Louis start to cut the minimum wage. The retail Mageddon is continuing. Sears and Kmart are looking at closing another 43 stores as the retail crisis continues, and they're still trying to blame online sales for it. But that's not what's going on. What's going on is we, the people, have been bled of all our money. We can't go to the stores or online and buy things. That's just the reality, and nobody wants to deal with that, or they wouldn't be talking about so many jobs being lost to automation in the coming years. Everybody's looking at their own little ledger, saying, well, this will be good for me, I think. They said that during offshoring. Didn't it actually, in the long run, harmed those corporations? But they're all still out there worshiping at the altar of Adam Smith, who basically said if everybody is just greedy for themselves, the whole system will move forward, and that was a fallacy. And Nobel Prize winning mathematician John Nash actually proved that in his doctoral dissertation. But nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that you have to be conscious of the system as a whole when you're doing your strategic planning. They just want to go on being greedy and believing that driving around in a Maserati and having a $100,000 wristwatch on your wrist is somehow making society better. And it really isn't. Now, getting over to Europe and the immigration crisis, Sweden is about to ban independent media for revealing the ethnicity of these arrested rapists and other criminals who have come on into Sweden. Their official policy is you don't need to know how much of the current explosion in sexual assaults and rapes and other crimes is tied in with the immigration program, the refugee program. It's none of your business. Meanwhile, Sweden's National Police Commissioner is out there just saying we need help. These Islamist militias are taking control over large areas of Sweden, where the police don't even go there anymore. They've shut down their police offices. Sweden is literally being carved up into these little warlord zones here. Meanwhile, down in Germany, Amt Krummen, who's responsible for borders at the German Union of Police, is saying Germany's borders are as wide open as a barn door, and criminals, people smugglers, and migrants of unexplained identity are just walking on in. It is out of control. Now, Nigel Farage is out there calling this all migration and Merkel madness and says it is turning the EU leaders against each other. And it really is. Merkel is still out there pushing the globalist agenda, refugee, along with the leadership of Sweden and other countries in the European Union saying, no, it's gone too far. And it's threatening to tear the European Union apart. And even Bill Gates, who was all on board with open borders and globalism and refugees, has done a complete 180, saying it's time to control the flow of the migrants. Europe will be overwhelmed. And I think his concern is that Europe literally could be torn into pieces by the refugee crisis, and that would be a major setback for the globalist New World Order. Meanwhile, the European Union has issued an order to Great Britain that they must take more refugees to help ease the migration crisis over in Italy, forgetting that it was the refugee crisis in part that led to the Brexit. Apparently, one illegal immigrant got tossed in prison for leading a gang of Nigerian fraudsters who pretended to be members of parliament, police, and even judges in a £10 million benefits scam. This Coyote Sani, 38, was sent to jail for 5 years and 3 months in this scam. But apparently these fraudsters, led by this illegal immigrant, stole personal data from the Civil Services Sports Council and had access to the data of 120,000 public sector employees and pensioners, and then used that data to fraudulently apply for all these various benefits. Don't nations have a right to keep people like this out of their country before they cause harm? Do we not have a right to keep potential terrorists out of our country before they terrorize? Do not nations have a right to keep potential rapists out of their country before they rape? And most importantly, do nations not have a right to keep people carrying highly contagious and in some cases untreatable diseases out of their population? And the answer is, of course, yes. That's what borders are for. That's what government is supposed to do. The proponents of the globalist New World Order are completely unconcerned with the harm that their ideology is causing to ordinary people. And we've had way too much of that. This absence of concern for ordinary people. That has to be brought back into the equation for government at all levels, from the city government up to the global government. And it's just not there. Now, as I mentioned to that caller, German police have arrested high-level politicians in a major pedophile ring bust. Apparently, there was this dark web sharing site, I guess, it's global, called that was out there. And They ran this operation called Operation Elysium, and it was actually started on the eve of the G20. And it threw the summit into disarray. Apparently, key members of at least 2 European delegations to the G20 were arrested. Again, names are not being released, and I'm opposed to that. I think people who engage in this kind of vile behavior ought to be publicly shamed instead of protected. Now, we found this news report from NBC, YouTube video. This is from March of this year, where even NBC was talking about allegations of sex crimes that were being covered up by Hillary Clinton's State Department, including prostitution and, yes, pedophilia. There is something wrong with our civilization that we seem to have these very sick people, mentally ill, seeking positions of power, and there's something wrong with us that we somehow go along with this. I would love to see that whole thing explode all over the globe. And apparently this dark web site where they were all trading their videos and pictures of what they've been doing, which is pretty gross and disgusting, had something like 80,000 people signed on to it. And I can imagine there's going to be an issue made of it. Donald Trump was talking about making an issue of this. It's time to clean up this part of the swamp. Vladimir Putin, very, very unhappy with all of this. He's cleaning it up out of Russia. And maybe the reason they are not doing a lot of reporting on it is because so many very high-ranking people are being involved. It's a scandal that could bring down an entire government. Look at the way they've been covering it up in Great Britain all these many years. Okay, apparently a British woman has been sent to prison for falsely claiming she was raped by 15 different men, one of whom himself was wrongfully sent to prison. Gemma Beale, 25 years old, just kept making up these stories because she felt empowered by sending those icky poo men into trouble. One actually fled the country. We're going to take a break for commercials. Back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we are unfortunately still not quite finished with political correctness because apparently there is a new Army training manual that includes a section on how to deal with transgenders who are recruited into the military, specifically men who are convinced they are women inside. And apparently the Army is going to allow these men to shower with the female soldiers. And the new Army training is telling the female soldiers they should just accept this. I somehow don't think this is going to make them more effective fighting people. Now, the other day we were talking about this Amish farmer who was making, growing and making his own traditional herbal remedies. And apparently he got into trouble with the FDA because the FDA had not approved the labeling on them. And at one point when this situation was ramping up, there was a confrontation. And he was looking at 48 years in prison. As it turns out, he was sentenced to just 6. But still, this is an overreach of government authority. Now, of course, his problem was that he was actually selling these products. And his label was not in compliance with the FDA. I've had a lot of people write on in when I was describing how to make your own nano silver, and we have our little machine that does it. And I had a lot of people who'd write on in and say, I'd like to buy a bottle. And I said, no, I'll give it to you. I won't sell it to you because then I have to go through that whole FDA nonsense, and it's not a business I really want to get into anyway. But it's a little excessive. 6 years for not having a correct label on something. And mind you, this is the same FDA that is now saying that TV commercials for prescription medications will no longer need to have those warnings on them about the adverse consequences of the medications. I sense a bias in the FDA's handling of these two different cases. Okay, apparently they have found the fossil remains of what could be a new unknown species of early human being over in Xinjiang, central China. They're doing all kinds of interesting things there. All right, we're coming up here on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire, and I'm being sent all these links to all these videos about life in North Korea, and I've posted them all to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and it just underscores, yes, everything we've been told about North Korea by the corporate media is, ta-da, drum roll please, a lie. Imagine my shock and horror. We've been lied to again. All right, real quickly, Francis in North Carolina, we only have a minute. What's on your mind?
Whoa. Michael?
Yes.
Hello. You just made a commentary about the military and people and so forth taking what shower in what room or whatever have you.
All right, I'm gonna have to hold you over the station break. Okay, don't hang up. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here for hour number 3. And, of course, for those of you watching on BAM User TV, this gorgeous creature sitting beside me is the lovely Lady Claire. And before we get into her talking points, though, we have 2 phone calls to take, and then we're probably going to close the lines for a while here. Francis in North Carolina, you had a question for me.
Yes, I do. Hello, aloha to you both. When the commentary about the military about one gender being able to use the shower of another gender and vice versa, whatever. My question is, it sounds like there's a big uproar about men thinking that they're women going into the ladies' room and the women should put up with and so forth. My question is, what about women who think they're men and going into the men's shower and that the men should put up with that?
Well, the article didn't say a thing about that at all, and I can imagine because of our socialization, probably the men are a lot less comfortable having women come in and shower with them than the women are going to be having men come in and shower with them.
Well, then you might as well have a shower that both sexes can go into. That way they don't have an issue about this transsexualism and so forth, which is a lot more, I guess, a proper term than transgenderism, which is politically correct.
Well, if you're going to go that way, like I said, when I was working in Rome at a production company called SPB, they actually had a single genderless restroom area where everybody had an individual stall, but the area where you wash your hands and everything was, men and women together, and actually it worked out very, very well. I think Americans are too uptight about showers and privacy in that regard anyway, certainly compared to the Europeans. Anyway, Francis, we're going to let you go. We're going to take one more phone call from Peter in Los Angeles. Peter, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I'd like to chime in on that same topic and make the point that the sociology of a small unit like a rifle squad or a platoon or whatever, it's very fragile, and sometimes you can look back in our history where very small groups of guys have made all that, like the 20th Maine, I'm sure you know, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Really only 200 guys may have decided what happened in the Civil War, and when you have sometimes in the past, honestly, and having been a long-time infantry guy, sometimes, people hang into a position because they're proving their manhood to the people next to them. I know that sounds archaic and old school, but I've seen it, really, I've seen it. And they'll go on because they don't want to be seen as, quote, less than a man than the guy next to them.
Yes.
There's that. The other part is, let's say, for instance, that you've got this stuff and they're showering together and all that sort of deal, and it's bad enough with the rapes, taking all the rape thing out of here already. But let's take that 21-year-old E6 squad leader who's got 13 guys and he's out in contact with the enemy, and who he puts on a point. And if he's diddling one of his squad mates, or whatever, how is that going to upset? Is he going to put them on point, or how is that going to upset the group dynamics? And just food for thought. I just wanted to hear what you.
Well, there have been a lot of
had to say in
experiments, with co-ed military, and they have not worked out very well. The Navy tried it for a while, and they had a lot of unexpected pregnancies with the attendant loss of personnel because these female personnel who'd gone through training and all the money was spent on them, and then they mustered out of the Navy with a brand new baby. It is a problem. Now, I don't have a problem with women serving in the military, but I do think the unit should be segregated for that very reason, to keep their focus on the task at hand and not dealing with these other issues on the ship. And I know I'm going to get a lot of nasty email from the feminists on that one. Anyway, Peter, we're going to let you go, and we're going to close the phone lines. Claire, what is the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, something WikiLeaks did today. Apparently, it unveiled CIA implants, or at least that's how they're describing it, that steal SSH credentials from Windows and Linux PCs. And this comes to us from the Hacker News. And today they published the 15th batch of its ongoing Vault 7 leak, which I'm sure most of us are aware of. Secure Shell, or SSH, is a cryptographic network protocol used for remote login to machines and servers securely or unsecured networks.
Over an unsecured network.
Yes. Dubbed Bothenspy implant for Microsoft Windows Eggshell client and Gyrfalcon targets the Open SSH client on various distributions of Linux OS, including CentOS, Debian, RHEL, Red Hat, OpenSUSE, and Ubuntu. Both implants steal user credentials for all active SSH sessions, then send them to a CIA-controlled server. Michael, this bites. This just absolutely bites. Do we have a shout-out to do?
Yeah, we do have a quick little shout-out here to our on-air affiliates, and we are once again being joined by the lovely Lady Claire, and we're talking about the latest revelation of CIA computer skullduggery to break into your machines. Now, there is a way to get around this particular exploit, and that is to configure your server so that it only accepts a secure shell login from a specific IP, meaning your own. And so anybody trying to log in with those credentials from any other IP, they're not going to get very far.
Good. That's good for our listeners and our readers to know. Moving over to Europe, Poland wants to become the European hub for U.S. gas, according to its president, Duda. A month after the first U.S. tanker carrying liquefied natural gas arrived in Poland.
Go ahead, clear your throat. All right.
Polish President Duda has unveiled an ambitious plan to make the country a pan-European energy hub able to distribute gas across Europe. And, of course, what this is going to do is this is going to undercut completely Russian gas going to Europe. I don't think Putin's going to be very happy about this.
No, I don't think so at all. And even though it looked like Trump and Putin's meeting at the G20 went very well, again, my concern is I don't see Trump is really totally in control of the U.S. government, and consequently, again, that explains our schizophrenic policy with China. Please, China, help us with North Korea, meanwhile overflying their islands and so forth. So, again, it's all about oil and economics and what currency the oil will be sold in.
That's true.
Because it's not a question of simply keeping Russian oil out of the European market. It is about forcing the European market to go back to needing U.S. dollars with which to buy that oil from the hub in Poland.
Yeah. That's going to be an interesting process as it moves forward, and I have to wonder what Putin is going to do to kind of work against that, or what kind of deals he can offer to Europe to make Russian oil a little bit more economical for them.
I think Putin will probably just focus more on developing the markets in areas that aren't chained to the U.S. dollar. I mean, Southeast Asia, Australia, other areas. It's a complex issue, and it's going to play out over a long amount of time, but I'm sure that Putin and his government do see this as the opening salvo in yet another oil war.
Yeah.
And the reason we should be concerned is the last one really didn't work out all that well.
No, it didn't.
No.
No, definitely it didn't. Well, going back to the government and Intel, the U.S. government is being sued for information on the secretive Five Eyes intelligence group. Now, this was established at the end of World War II and includes the U.S., UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. The agreement covers how intelligence is shared, but that's about all we know about it. That could change because the U.S. government is being sued for information about the deal, officially known as the United Kingdom's United States Communication Intelligence Agreement. A U.S.-based charity,
British-based.
UK-based charity, Privacy International, has filed a lawsuit against the NSA, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the State Department, and the National Archives and Records Administration, which all hold information about the intelligence sharing partnership. The lawsuit follows requests for details of partnership under the U.S. Freedom of Information Act. All government agencies have rejected the request.
Imagine my shock.
Think, But I wonder if they are going to get some information to find out how total and complete this info sweep is on, innocent emails, office emails, and stuff that has really no relationship to national security.
Well, obviously, when the Five Eyes or Echelon was started at the end of World War II, the interception ability was very limited. Mostly, it involved eavesdropping on communication satellites that were carrying telephone and teletype traffic across the ocean. And we actually have some of those antenna farms right here on the island of Oahu, along with a brand new NSA data center, which I think is where Snowden was working. But the reason it was set up that way to share the intelligence was to get around legal restrictions in all of these 5 countries that said the government cannot spy on their citizens without the appropriate warrants. Here in the United States, of course, we have the Fourth Amendment guaranteeing right to privacy. So what Five Eyes was really doing, and why they've been so secretive about it, is each of these Five Eyes companies would spy on the citizens of the other countries. Then they would simply trade the data so that they could say, technically, we're not spying on our own people. We're just getting this data from these other countries that are not constrained by our privacy laws. And that was a big part of it. And over time, of course, as the NSA and CIA have developed new technologies to spy on us, Echelon has become much more potent and powerful. But its primary reason for existing is to bypass national protections on privacy.
Right. And it's gone a long way to really destroying the Fourth Amendment here in the United States.
We have a Fourth Amendment?
Yes, we did.
We did? Okay.
We did. And it seems to me silly because the bad guys have already gotten their communications encrypted, and the rest of us is just basically innocent stuff. So what do they think they're going to get when the bad guys know just to keep everything vanilla or to encrypt, and the rest of us is pretty harmless stuff? I mean, they've probably seen text from me to you, honey, we need some chips from the supermarket. I mean, in a text. But what are they going to get from that?
Well,
I mean, come on.
There's the idea of possibly catching criminals and terrorists. There's also just straight intelligence gathering, like how well the economy is doing in other countries. Are we getting accurate reports, or are they lying to us? Basically keeping an eye on where the wealth is parked around the world and various other things they can collect that way. But again, all of it a violation of these laws in these countries, saying that we have a right to privacy. Until the government has evidence we've actually done something wrong, they have to mind their own business.
It's unfortunate the lawsuit did not go forward, that it was rejected by every single agency that was approached.
Well, I think you need to go back and look at that. The lawsuit is the result of the fact that all of these refused. 5 countries refused.
Okay.
Now they're basically filing the lawsuit under the Freedom of Information Act in the United States and similar laws that are in these other countries. Whether they'll actually get anything or not, it remains to be seen. But it is going to bring public attention to the fact that all of these governments are basically treating us like their property. that they're watching us all the time. They're spying on us. They consider our computers to be theirs to use, which is a violation of the Fifth Amendment in this country, which says the government cannot take your property without compensation.
Right.
And here they are taking my compute cycles, my disk room, my bandwidth, and using it for their own purposes, and I'm not being compensated for it one tiny bit.
No, I hear you. So I do hope that it does go forward. I do. Apparently, getting on to economics, the financial system of the U.S. rests on the health of just 5, count them 5, mega banks.
It sounds dangerous.
And this would be Citigroup, J.P. Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, and Goldman Sachs. And according to the Office of Financial Research, looking at this, the larger the bank, the greater the potential spillover of it if it defaults. The higher its leverage, the more prone it is to default under stress. And the greater its connectivity index, the greater is the share of the default that cascades onto the banking systems. The product of these factors provides an overall measure of the contagion risk that the banks pose for the financial system. And it is huge. According to data from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, OCC, these same bank holding companies, as of March 31st of this year, were sitting on an astronomical level of derivatives. In notional face amounts of derivatives, Citigroup holds 54.8 trillion, JP Morgan Chase holds 48.6 trillion, Goldman Sachs Group has 45.6 trillion, Bank of America held 35.8 trillion, while Morgan Stanley sat on $30.8 trillion worth of derivatives. Mike, that's scary.
That is very scary because, again, if you look at the laws controlling derivatives, they're basically functioning as an insurance policy. But unlike regular insurance, they're not regulated. And these banks are not being asked to maintain cash reserves to make good on these derivatives if they come due. And, of course, in the 2008 meltdown, it was the derivatives that took down AIG.
Yeah. And there is also now a very clever little weasel wording when it comes to banking laws about people who just have their regular accounts, business or personal accounts, are considered fair game. If something happens to the bank, they can do a haircut.
Yes.
Against you, you know.
They've already changed all the laws.
Yeah.
If you are a customer of a bank, you are no longer an account holder. You are redefined as an unsecured investor in the bank, meaning when the bank loses money, you now legally can be forced to share in those losses. It's another reason why you shouldn't have your money in the bank anyway, other than to pay your bills.
Yeah.
And have the rest under your own control in your own home. And because when it starts to come apart, again, the poor are always made to pay for all.
Yeah, it's scary out there. And some of the economists that I'm reading say definitely before the end of the year we're going to see a big collapse.
Even Ron Paul was out there saying it could be 25% off the stock market, and that will be enough to trigger many of those derivatives.
Yeah. Also, there seems to be a growing gap between China and the U.S. on North Korea policy, and it seems to be widening. And a lot of tension since North Korea's recent successful ICBM test. And it looks like it's splintered any sense of unity between the U.S. and China on approaching the issue.
Well, again, for the U.S. sending all those ships and bombers over those islands and holding that military exercise in the area of the Indian Ocean bordering the South China Sea.
Right.
It was ridiculous to think China was going to be cooperative on North Korea at a time when the U.S. is deliberately playing picador down there in the South China Sea.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. terms it freedom of navigation, but isn't it just sort of being in someone's backyard where you have no business?
Well, freedom of navigation exercises under international law are supposed to respect the territorial waters of foreign countries, which is generally understood to be 12 nautical miles. The U.S. ship sailed within that border, signaling that the United States does not recognize those islands as Chinese sovereign territory.
Ouch.
Even though at the end of World War II, the United States did sign the Cairo Convention that did give those islands, which had been captured by Japan in World War II, back to China.
Yeah.
So, again, It's an attitude of, we don't care what we said a while ago. Today, we want things to be different, and we have the firepower to make it happen.
Yeah. And in particular, State Department officials have criticized China for even bringing them a proposal that would see North Korea freeze its nuclear and missile testing in return for the U.S. ending military exercises in South Korea, saying they see no equivalence. Well, if you don't have something to negotiate with, how is the other party supposed to negotiate, Mike? I mean, I can't get my head wrapped around this.
Well, unfortunately, the U.S. government has been hanging around with Israel for way too long because this is the way Israel handles the negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
You do what we want first,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe we'll do something nice for you. And that's basically what it is. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Lady Claire, what is your next story?
Well, it's a very interesting story, and one I think that we're going to see a lot more of in times to come. The Mennonite Church in America has voted yesterday to sell its holdings in companies that profit from the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories, and is the latest American Christian group to do so. It was made at their national convention in Orlando, Florida, and even though the economic impact, Mike, is not going to be big, votes like this are very closely watched as a measure of views on Israel and the Palestinian from within the U.S., the Jewish state's closest and most important ally.
As Nikki Haley keeps demonstrating over and over again.
Can't we fly her permanently to Tel Aviv, please?
I want to build a wood crate.
No.
Throw her in there with some MREs, drill some air holes.
No. Just put her on a plane. The resolution directs managers of the $3 billion Everence Church Fund to regularly screen holdings to avoid any economic support for Israeli policies in the occupied territories. They had rejected a divestment proposal at their last national meeting a couple of years ago amid fears that the resolution would be considered anti-Jewish. The statement adopted yesterday condemns anti-Semitism, encourages stronger ties between church members and Jews, and endorses a review of how Mennonites respond to the Holocaust. Now, the membership of the Mennonite Church is only about 75,000. It's not huge. But every time something like this happens, it's saying, we realize what's going on in the occupied Palestinian territories. We're not going to support it anymore. So I would like to hope that some of their sister and brother churches make the same move very soon.
And it is very important on all of this thing to emphasize that we're talking about the actions of the government of Israel.
Yeah.
This is not anti-Jewish. It's not anti-Semitic. Israel tries to say it is, but that's like saying that criticism of the Nazis is only because you hate the German people, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
We're talking about the actions of a very few people who are the government of a country. And we know even from our own domestic politics that people who are in charge of countries are not always very nice people.
Nope.
And we all have a right to stand up and say, you're not being nice people.
Yeah, absolutely. And another little article I found about the Israeli military. They're starting to buy copter drones with machine guns. Gee, I wonder against whom those are going to be used. They're buying small multi-rotor drones modified to carry a machine gun, a grenade launcher, and a variety of other weapons to fight tomorrow's urban warfare battles. Their maker, Florida startup Duke Robotics, is pitching the Decad drone to the U.S. military as well. And there was an IDF colonel and a reservist in the Israeli Special Forces who co-founded the company in 2014, along with a paratrooper turned robotic engineer and another IDF buddy. And Mike, this is going to be like shooting fish in a barrel with this kind of equipment.
It definitely is.
Oh.
And I remember when this company first started, they actually landed a contract with a police department in one of our cities, and the outcry was so great the contract was actually canceled.
Yeah.
You know, this idea of a drone overhead with these kind of weapons, it's going to be indiscriminate fire.
Yeah.
Innocent people who are not doing anything wrong are going to be caught in this.
Yeah.
And
children, the medically fragile elderly, women who have no connection to any violence. And it's so saddening to me that the Israeli government doesn't realize that the only settlement ultimately is going to be political and not military in nature.
Well, unfortunately, the government of Israel's agenda is to get rid of all the Palestinians and grab all the land for themselves. And now they're trying to grab part of Syria, the Golan. They're literally talking about shipping what's left of the Palestinians out to refugee camps in other countries who don't want to take them. Possibly even reposition them onto the Sinai, and Egypt hasn't said they're eager for that either.
No.
But again, Israel refuses to draw their borders, and they're constantly changing them.
Yeah. And
okay, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and your next story, Claire?
A federal judge has denied Hawaii's challenge to Trump travel ban. A federal judge in Hawaii yesterday denied a motion filed by the state of Hawaii that challenged President Trump's travel ban on 6 Muslim-majority countries, asking to expand the exceptions for visas applicants. And the guy who did this was U.S. District Court Judge Derek Watson, and here's the irony, appointed by then-President Barack Obama in 2013, denied the emergency motion filed Wednesday that asked for a clarification of the U.S. Supreme Court's use of the phrase bona fide when describing relationships. Visa applicants from countries affected by the travel ban must now prove a bona fide familial relationship to be accepted. This is normal.
Yes.
The state argues that the White House interpreted the definition of close family members too narrowly. Hawaii's challenge sought to expand the exemptions to include grandparents, grandchildren, brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, and cousins of people currently living in the United States. And according to a report by the Associated Press, Watson said the relationship question should wait and be poised before the Supreme Court, not himself.
That's a good call.
Judge Watson,
that's a good
bravo.
Call.
Bravo, sir. Chalk one up for President Trump. I have a feeling that when this case gets heard in the fall, that they will support the travel ban. Because, as I recall, Mike, there is no mention about religion.
No, it's a list of specific countries that are considered a threat. And again, under Title VIII, the president is allowed to just blanket block certain categories of people from immigration to this country.
Yeah.
Trump is the law's on Trump's side. And all these open border sanctuary city people, they're in violation of the law. And frankly, I think it's time to start arresting some of these mayors and governors who are doing sanctuary cities and throw them in prison, because it is a crime to offer any kind of aid or assistance to illegal immigrants. Whether it's shelter, transportation, a job, phony documents, it is a crime. And when you have a sanctuary city where you're out there saying, we're going to prevent the immigration authorities from doing their job, at least that's obstruction, and it is a violation of Title VIII.
Yeah, and the thing that kills me about this is cities and states and areas of the country are already struggling with unfunded mandates. They are killing a lot of cities in this country.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah,
I mean, it's reached the point where they're finally acknowledging and recognizing that uncontrolled immigration is threatening to tear Europe apart. The same thing could happen here in the United States.
Yeah.
We could go back to being 50 separate sovereign states, which maybe not be such a bad thing.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Yeah. And also there is the burden of diseases that have been wiped out in this country for, decades, all of a sudden reemerging. Especially, I'm thinking Minneapolis, where they've had non-treatable TB, tuberculosis, and it's resistant to any drug that we have out there.
And it's highly contagious.
Yeah, I mean, would you, if you had kids going to school, would you feel a little threatened if there was that going about in your neighborhood and your kid was exposed? No, this cannot continue to happen.
I'm old enough to remember when tuberculosis was still a problem in this country.
Yeah.
And it's a nasty, nasty disease. And we have now bubonic plague out in New Mexico.
Oh, man.
And again, we have way too many people in positions of power who have their dreams and their ideology, and they're totally unconcerned with the damage and the harm they are causing.
Yeah, because it never affects them in their gated communities. That never happens.
True.
Yeah. I'd like to go over to something James Mattis said recently about the U.S. military remains ready for conflict with North Korea.
Here's your rifle, James.
Yeah,
Here's your parachute.
following the country's latest ballistic missile test, but added that he does not believe Washington is closer to war with Pyongyang after its ICBM test. Michael, does that make any sense to you? What the heck soever?
Yeah, they're basically, it means they're starting to pull back. There's talk tough, we could still do it, but they're actually pulling back. And again, part of the problem is the missile that North Korea tested is not their longest range missile. It's actually their third.
Yep.
And they have missiles with a much longer range already in service. And even the Moscow delegation to the UN Security Council was saying it doesn't really qualify as an ICBM. It's certainly an intermediate range missile, but it's not really a globe girdling ICBM, which is generally the accepted definition of that. And again, North Korea, like every other country, has a right to build weapons to deter invasion of their sovereign territory. And North Korea has already been through an invasion of their territory by the United States once before, and they're looking at a U.S. government that is just invading and regime changing all across the globe, and they don't want to be on that list.
Yeah. The other thing he said that made me feel like we may be moving back, and this is a quote, "I do not believe this capability in itself brings us closer to war because the President's been very clear, the Secretary of State's been very clear, that we are leading with diplomatic and economic efforts." And that's what he said yesterday.
Okay, good. Well, we're going to sleep a little better tonight on that one.
He added that the diplomatic effort includes economic sanctions that are supported by the military position that we're taking right now. I mean, how much more can they they've sanctioned the banks that work with them. They've sanctioned every company that works with them. What else can they do, Mike?
Well, again, what they did not take into account is that Asian concept of face.
Yeah.
Kim Jong-un cannot back down. He will appear weak to his own people.
Yeah.
I wish he would not be quite as provocative with what he's saying, but then maybe he's not really saying it anyway, and we're just getting another creative translation in the corporate media. Remember when they were telling us all that Ahmadinejad said they're going to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and it turned out that wasn't what he'd said at all. So we have to be very, very careful of that. And by the way, a lot of people sent in more videos about what life is really like in North Korea, and they're now on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. You will be surprised. Okay, and it just underscores the fact that everything you think you know about North Korea was told to you by the same people who told you Saddam had nuclear weapons, Assad was gassing his own people, the Lusitania wasn't carrying weapons, Pearl Harbor was a surprise, there were torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, and on and on and on and on and on. How many more times do you have to be lied to before you're going to stand up and say, I'm mad as heck, and I'm not listening to you anymore?
And you know something, I will have to tell you, I think I've mentioned it on air before, Tehran in Iran is on my bucket list.
Yes.
Because of the art, the music, the fact that I, as a Christian, can go to an English-speaking Christian church and worship there.
One of the oldest continuous operating synagogues in the world is in Iran.
Oh, yeah.
And again, this idea that the Iranians want a new Holocaust.
No.
Why aren't they starting with the people that are already inside their own borders? I mean, remember when Israel went over to Iran and they tried to offer financial incentives for the Jews living in Iran to move to Israel? And the Iranian Jews said, no, we're comfortable here. We've got good businesses. We got friends. There's no reason for us to leave. We're very happy here. There's another video out there called Don't Tell Mother I'm in Iran.
Oh, it's great.
It is. It's a great behind the scenes. And again, a reminder, what you think you know about Iran is another corporate media crafted lie.
I'd like to swing over to Syria to point to what I think is a very positive sign. Syrians are now beginning to return home.
Yes.
After 6 years of fighting a brutal and long war against foreign-backed terrorist proxy forces, the Syrian army and its allies have made significant gains in recent months. The Syrian army's recent triumphs include liberating many areas in the Homs province, reaching the Iraqi border in what was described as a strategic turning point in the war. In addition to securing the Aleppo province from ISIS, it is clear that the Syrian army has the upper hand in the conflict, a fact that the hawks in Washington, Brussels, Riyadh, and Tel Aviv find very difficult to stomach. And as they continue to prevail on the ground, we're looking at hundreds of thousands of Syrians beginning to feel it's safe enough for me and my family to return home. And as Andres Maheshik, the spokesperson for the UN High Commission for Refugees, the UN Refugee Agency, said in a press briefing at the end of June that many Syrians are returning to their homes partially due to a real or perceived improvement in security conditions in many regions that have been recently liberated. The UNHC is seeing a notable trend of spontaneous returns to and within Syria in 2017. Aid agencies estimate that more than 440,000 internally displaced people have returned to their homes in Syria during the first 6 months of this year. In parallel, the UNHCR has monitored over 31,000 Syrian refugees returning from neighboring countries so far in 2017. Now, Mike, I think this is a good thing.
So obviously it's a good thing.
Yeah. When people feel safe enough to return home after a 6-year brutal civil war that was generated from the outside, I hope that more of them are able to return as the Syrian army is able to liberate more territory.
I'll tell you one thing, George Soros won't be buying them a return ticket from Europe. All the money to get them over there, I'm not sending you home. You walk home.
Yeah. Oh, dear. Mr. George Soros, a very interesting human being. Oh, I thought this was funny. Well, we've known since the election that the Clintonistas could not take any responsibility for her having lost the election.
Yes.
So they're in their own blame game. Well, now the blame game is being upped. Bitter Clinton supporters try to unseat Bernie Sanders in Senate race. Oh, the irony. Vermont resident John Svitovsky announced on July 5th that he is challenging Senator Bernie Sanders in his upcoming re-election in 2018. In his most recent race for re-election, Sanders won over 71% of the vote, and the Democratic Party didn't bother to run a candidate. In the 2016 presidential primary, Sanders received over 86% of the vote in Vermont. Among the small percentage of people who voted for Hillary in the state was Svitovsky, a homeless shelter director who was beginning to receive support from other disgruntled Clinton supporters across the country. Like it's Bernie Sanders' fault she lost the election when she stole it from him. I mean, come on, Mike.
There's another possibility, which is that they want Bernie Sanders out of the way of any potential Democratic challenger to Trump in 2020. Okay. Because even the Democrats, they did not want Bernie Sanders any more than they wanted Trump. I mean, I find it difficult to believe that Hillary would actually try and run again in 2020.
Yeah.
But she might, and they'll just double up on the vote fraud again, which is why Trump's Commission on Election Integrity has got to do their job and actually crack down on all of this nonsense.
And the article continues, though Sanders enjoys overwhelming support in his home state, his political opponents from around the country have isolated and built up naysayers to diminish his popularity. In June 2016, NBC host Joy Reid did a profile in the Daily Beast on Al Giordano, an anti-Sanders troll who gained a sizable following of Clinton supporters on Twitter during the primaries. Giordano claimed that he would run against Sanders, but in 2018 has yet to file and currently resides in Mexico City. In February 2016, the Daily Beast ran a hit piece meaning to perpetuate the whitewashing of Sanders' presidential campaign. It featured an interview with a black Vermont resident who claimed Sanders ignored the black community in the state. In October 2016, Politico ran an article featuring quotes from several Vermont Democrats complaining that Sanders wasn't helping Democrats in Vermont, despite the fact that Sanders had made several appearances around the country to campaign on behalf of Hillary Clinton. And now Svitovsky, a Democrat from Bridgeport, Vermont, is trying to make another case against Sanders. Boy, talk about bitter grapes, Michael. Whoa.
I don't think it's bitter grapes. And when you look at that investigation into Sanders' wife, which Sanders insists is politically motivated, he may actually be right. This is too well organized and too widespread.
Okay.
They're trying to get Sanders out of the way of whoever it is they're going to run against Trump in 2020. That's what this is about.
That certainly makes sense. And apparently with Loretta Lynch, the plot is beginning to thicken as new details emerge of her dealings with the Hillary campaign. This comes to us from Zero Hedge. it's very interesting, and you've touched on this several times.
Yes.
The DNC has failed to cooperate with the Russia investigators by handing over their infamous email server either to FBI or Robert Mueller's team. And if they're going to claim Russian hacking, why are they so terrified about Mueller or the FBI getting, those emails?
Well, that's like you call the police and say, my house was robbed by my neighbor, and the police show up, and you say, well, you can't come in, you can't collect any evidence, just take my word for it, I've been robbed and my neighbor did it.
Yeah.
And it is so obvious, Trump tweeted out, apparently he is being asked about this by many of the other world leaders at the G20, and he tweeted that out, and apparently Joe Scarborough had an instant meltdown saying, Trump is mentally ill for still thinking about this.
But I think that Loretta Lynch is not going to leave this situation with a lot of credibility left. And you have to wonder with the stonewalling from the DNC if this just might have something to do with this purely coincidental meeting between Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton on a tarmac in Phoenix, and or her assurances to members of Clinton's campaign that the FBI's investigation, or matter, if you prefer, of Hillary Clinton wouldn't go too far.
Now, she's now denying that she ever said that.
Oh, yeah.
But it's apparently it's on a paper document.
Yeah.
And, of course, the purely coincidental timing when Seth Rich was assassinated by a professional hitman, according to the Profile Project, was when the leaks from the DNC servers stopped.
Yeah. And as they've reported before, statement seems to contradict reports that Lynch personally assured members of Hillary Clinton's campaign, potentially Amanda Renteria, that the FBI's investigation wouldn't go too far. And apparently when Loretta Lynch testified last year about her decision not to prosecute Hillary Clinton for mishandling classified information, she swore she never talked to anyone on the Clinton campaign. That categorical denial, though, made in response to a series of questions about whether she spoke with the Clinton world about remaining Attorney General if Hillary won the election, could come back to haunt her. Couldn't happen to a more deserving human being, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think the narcocracy has ever been as exposed and vulnerable as it is right now. And, of course, that's why they are so upset with Donald Trump. All right, we've got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our Pauhana Friday program here. And lovely Lady Claire, what do you want to talk about now?
Well, I want to talk about one of the good fallouts from the meeting between Putin and Trump. As apparently a U.S. Special Representative for the Ukraine negotiations was appointed by the U.S. today upon the request of Russian President Vladimir Putin, according to the U.S. Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. The U.S. Special Representative for the Ukraine negotiations was appointed by the United States, and at his request, and the announcement is going to have the Special Representative for Ukraine be Ambassador Kurt Volker. And Ambassador Volker is an old hand in geopolitics, and apparently very experienced, and hopefully he can manage to tamp down what is going on in the eastern Ukraine. Mike, your thoughts?
Well, again, the issue is that the U.S. went on in and they mucked up Ukraine with that coup d'etat in Kiev.
Right.
And I think they're starting to understand that we have edged a little too close to war with Russia, and that they need to back off there. At this point, there's nothing left in Ukraine anybody really wants, and they're starting to be talk about maybe pulling back from this idea of Ukraine joining the EU or joining NATO, and so it really was all for naught. And again, we don't know what was actually said between Trump and Putin. Putin may have gone on in there and simply said, you need to understand, we're going to stay as long as you are in both Syria and Ukraine, and Trump may have understood that what Putin is talking about is a war of attrition, which the United States is ill-equipped to survive right now. That's
Yeah.
what happened in Vietnam. They just kept up the fighting and wore us down until we had to quit. And so hopefully sanity is going to prevail, and they're going to pull on back, and that does leave the U.S. government with a real problem. They don't have a major war on which to blame the coming economic crash or distract from it.
Yep.
And so when the economy does come apart, we, the American people, are going to stand up there, and we're going to point our fingers at those who really deserve the blame, which is the Wall Street money junkies and their enablers on Capitol Hill. And, well, we should. We should as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm hopeful for these talks between Putin and Trump, and I have a feeling that the men kind of got a measure of each other, and it was a good one.
The sense I got from the video of them shaking hands was that they were meeting as potentially friends, and there's a lot of mutual respect there, which is something Putin certainly did not get from Obama.
Oh, no.
And I think that's a very important aspect in the Russian culture, that you treat as equals with mutual respect, and everything's going to work on out. You come on in trying to bluff your way through, especially against a chess master.
Yes.
Like Putin, you're going to be in trouble. All right, well, we're coming up here on the end of the program, and we want you to have a really good weekend, very safe weekend, very relaxing weekend. Share what you know from our website with everybody, and do make a point of staying tuned, because John Stedmiller's program is coming on up, and there's going to be a lot more interesting information there as well.
Right.
So we'll see you all on Monday here on the Republic Broadcasting Network, and Aloha America.